Yeah. Unknown Brain. Marvin Devine. I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks for all the rumors you be claiming. It's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration.
Oh, I already made the Twitter post. Thank you, though. We're live. We are live, by the way. Hello, everyone. Hello. To the whole one viewer out there right now, because I just made the Twitter post. So gotta give it a couple minutes to get people in here. Did I not? What the hell? Did I not? Oh, I must not have. Whoops. I thought I did. Yeah. I had typed out the tweet, and then I just never hit the tweet button. That's what happened. There we go. There's a tweet out now. I can also go put it in a couple Discords. Go to my Discord, that is. I appreciate you. We'll see if some more people get in here in just a second. They can all hear us, though, so don't say anything too bad. I said they can all hear us, though, so don't say anything too bad. I'm giving you a hard time, buddy. Well, I hear that, and to be fair, like when I was jokingly saying that I had prepared 6 pages of notes, that wasn't a case of like, oh, 6 pages of notes. That's all sorts of stuff that I want to talk about specifically. It's more so just 6 pages worth of notes of just general information that I can reference back to at any time. Like the chat here can see that, which by the way, Ace is exhausted and terminally online leftist. How's it going, dudes? But the chat can see I've got a very long, well, 6-page document here of just notes on various morality things that I was typing out just so I have them. That way I could reference back to them anytime. And that's not even all of it. I didn't even get everything on there that I wanted to have on there, but it is what it is. It's nothing. It's nothing. So, Luca, how's it going, buddy? You're kind of a hot topic person on the Twitter webs. Oh, can't hear you apparently. No, it's my fault. It's okay. Now they should be able to. No, they cannot. Okay. It's my own fault. I use all sorts of virtual audio cables and whatnot. Okay, now they should be able to hear you. Now that should work. Luca.
Testing. Hello. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Can anyone hear me? Yes. No. Probably. Occasionally.
Okay. So, anyhow, Luca, buddy, you're kind of a hot topic person on the Twitter webs.
Yes, and I hate that with all my fucking heart because I swear to God I never chose this. Like I literally said like the other day, literally around 1 year ago, I had at this time 400 followers. And right now I've got 5,800 for no reason other than I don't know.
That's insane. That's actually insane. Like, I think it has a lot to do with that you're very outspoken, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I was telling some other people that you have a habit of feeling like you need to respond to everything that's said to you.
Yeah, because I mostly made Twitter with the idea of learning more, having more knowledge, and as such, discussing with others in order to acquire this knowledge. So to me, any discussion can be a precious chance to learn more about things. Which, considering also my recent political compass that I posted around 3 weeks or 2 weeks ago, actually I went more towards the left as my knowledge about certain topics has increased. But regardless, I feel like every time I do not, I block someone. Like yesterday, I made a post right where I posted my blocks,
Yeah, I saw
and
that. I
yes,
saw
and
that.
I only had 50 blocks, which some people were surprised about that. And the reason for that is simply because I do not. I feel like by blocking people, I would be losing information. I would be losing knowledge that I could actually acquire.
Yeah, I could see that argument. I think that there's other ways to examine it, and that's I could see that, but I think some people just have the mindset, and I'm kind of the mindset that it's just not worth it sometimes. But
Oh, I completely understand it. I totally do, except that sometimes people deliberately use the block button in a very unhealthy way. If it was for me, I genuinely would take away the block button except for like very limited occasions, because I think the mute button already does all of that that is
I
needed in a sense.
maybe not. But that's not the point of us talking here.
Fair, fair, fair,
I
fair, fair.
wanted
Sorry,
to,
sorry.
yeah, I wanted to talk to you because to be completely honest, I think you get way too much hate. I think you get way more hate than you deserve. And this is coming from somebody who even is an orthodox Marxist. And so you and I vehemently disagree on almost everything politically speaking, because you're a liberal, more left leaning than others. Like, would you say that you're closer to SOCDEM yet, or are you still more
I
centrist?
identify myself as a market socialist.
We
So
won't talk. We won't get into market socialism and all its flaws today, because we're going to be talking about
sure.
today is some more interesting deep level discussions, because there's something that
Mm-hmm.
happened over the past, what would you say, like week, 2 weeks, that is
2
really,
weeks. Let's put it
yeah,
that way.
it's really been blowing up on the Twitters, and you've been extremely involved in it, and that was the whole death threats, which I don't necessarily think that we should call them death threats per se.
Well, it
Um,
depends on what you mean. But well, if we take the literal meaning of the word threat, no, they are not death threats, but they are death incitations in a sense.
Invitations I can get with,
Yeah.
or insinuations. Like, I can understand that. I think that calling it a threat, however, minimalizes the reality that people do actually get threats like that on Twitter. For example, somebody very prominent in the leftist sphere, Merrick, Punished Mother, had some psychotic Twitter user recently, just within the past few months, talk about trying to track her down and murder her. And now the same Twitter user's back and like is in Dylan Burns replies trying to get him to invite Merrick to one of his live in-person stream events so that he could show up there. And it's like, so I feel like calling these kind of things that are at the end of the day memes more than anything else, threats, kind of downplays the severity of real threats that do exist out there on Twitter.
No. Okay, fair enough. I completely see your argument there, by all means, and I agree with it. But like the point that basically started all this is how these death invitations. Let's call it that this way from now
Yeah,
on. So at
sure,
least we
sure. The
the
name's
fact.
really inconsequential. I'm just more being kind of
Yeah, yeah.
semantic asshole there, to be completely honest.
No, don't worry, it's fine, it's fine. You just wanted to make a prefix, and it's okay, don't worry. But like, as I was trying to say, I think that the main issue many people solve with their usage online are two main reasons. One, it's how they are often misused towards the wrong targets, and the second issue in general about their own very usage in general, about how they are supposed to basically be completely pointless.
Yeah, I do think that there's a serious problem on the, especially within the online left, that suicide and mental health has started to get really swept under the rug as a serious issue it is, where it's become normalized to joke about it. And I think that's an issue that does need to be addressed. Now, that said, there are some moral arguments to be made, and I think a couple people, when they were talking with you on Twitter, kind of touched on them a little bit. As to why it might be seen as acceptable to make these comments towards certain people or under certain circumstances. Now, that's not to say that I necessarily agree with it, but I can tell you right now, if I really wanted to, underneath all three of the primary normative ethic frameworks, I could give you a justification for telling somebody to, for lack of better terms, uninstall their Life DLC.
Okay. So I want to first say why I'm against them, because there are two main reasons for them. So the first reason is that in general, death invitations have the effect of dehumanizing someone, and
Mm-hmm.
as someone that like in general, I believe that any and all forms of dehumanization should be not used, or at least should be fought against in all the shapes, forms, or subject towards they aimed at. And that is the first argument, because I just simply do not think that we can, with a straight face, say that some forms of dehumanization are okay while others are not. Because to me, that sounds like an hypocritical position. The second argument that I want to make is more of a utilitarian logic. Especially when it comes to the left, the majority of the left, for good or bad reasons, share in terms of like in terms of punishment versus rehabilitative justice. The majority of the left is on the rehabilitation side of things, and especially when it comes to this specific topic, death invitations do not in any way, logic or aspect, like help into addressing the rehabilitation process, because if you or anyone who has read any kind of sociological or psychological notion of things on how to rehabilitate people, you would see that the first and major focus on rehabilitation is that of understanding and patience, not aggressiveness and hate. As such, trying to approach people that are on quote unquote evil or on quote unquote bigots would be kind of like going against that, because like on one side you're saying that you're on favor of rehabilitation, but then on the other you're practicing something else, so it's kind of contradictory. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And now there's an interesting argument that some people have made in the past when it comes to these, because it really comes down to a rehabilitative versus it's not punitive, but retributive justice. Rehabilitative versus retributive, and it really comes down to weighing the moral weight of, is the amount, to use your utilitarian arguments that you made, silly utilitarians. I'm not a utilitarian, to make that clear right away, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. There are utilitarian arguments to be made that some people are not able to be rehabilitated, and it would be overall better and morally right to just straight up kill them. For example, one that you could easily make this with is, let's say that the most extreme example, Adolf Hitler, had he been captured rather than had he, gotten the solo kill on himself, the likelihood of rehabilitating someone like that is so astronomically low that the threat they pose by still existing actually outweighs and produces more negative utility than it does positive utility putting the effort in to rehabilitate them. So you would just cease that existence, and he creates the highest amount of happiness and well-being for the most people. You're maximizing your utility. It's that classical utilitarianism, and that's why utilitarianism actually has a major flaw within it, because there's a slogan that is assigned to utilitarianism a lot that says the greatest happiness for the greatest number, and I actually just pulled that up in my research document here and showed it to the chat. It's misleading because one act that increases happiness for the most people, say just capturing and trying to rehabilitate Hitler, you may have the most people happy about that, but will still fail to maximize the net good in the world if the smaller amount of people, the number of Jewish people, the number of Romani people, LGBT people who are terrified of his existence, if their unhappiness is greater than the amount of happiness produced from people being like, oh, we're going to try and rehabilitate him, then you're actually not making a utilitarian justification for you rehabilitating it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. Although I have some critiques already, but I don't know if you want me to say them
Go
already.
for it. Go ahead.
So I think there is already a major flaw in the logic you presented. Like you said, the flaw of utilitarianism. And utilitarianism is not just about achieving the maximum happiness for everyone.
It's about utility, which is usually defined as well-being.
Yes, but the notion of well-being can be interpreted in an infinite number of ways. The fact that you focused on the happiness is not like it's limiting in a sense, because the well-being can mean a fuck ton of things. Sorry.
Well, that's because when we talk. No, you're good. You can swear. That's because when we talk about classical utilitarianism, which is the paradigm of consequentialism, the founders of it, I'm blanking on their name right now. It was back in the Enlightenment, but the people who first started talking about it and first started writing about it, one of the things that they specifically said about it was that pleasure is the only intrinsic good and pain is the only intrinsic bad. So that's how we measure our utility in utilitarianism.
Yes, but that notion of utilitarianism has gone throughout an evolution. For example, remember the trolley problem, where you have a unlimited number of people on one rail and a higher number of people in another rail, and the trolley problem asks you which one of the two rails you should sacrifice. And that discussion takes a lot of interpretations and answers if we just based our logic on utilitarianism. Because see, if we just say that we want to save the railing with more people, with the logic that, well, there are more people there, you may have a point there, because you completely dismissed the shape, jobs, figures of these people, like what they are or such. Take for example, right? If on the railing with less people, there were, for instance, rock stars or like media people that were entertaining many more people. That already, the utilitarian argument starts a bit to fall off, because yes, you are saving more people by saving the railing with more people, but at the same time the quote unquote damage to society increases. So the point that I was trying to make is that utilitarianism is not just about happiness. It's also about many times actual production value, in the sense of how much is produced, or how much usefulness of the creation is created, and not just about happiness. And so this is why, to me, saying that, like, for example, at the beginning of your argument, you said that not everyone can be rehabilitated, and already that is a mistake if we just base ourselves upon sociological and psychological
I did not say that not everyone can be rehabilitated. What I said is that the amount of time and effort put into it would be too long compared to the amount of positive utility that would be produced.
Absolutely. It would take more time, but again, it would cause more utility, because if think about it from
Not necessarily. So no, because you're thinking about it that in a vacuum that, oh, just this rehabilitated person is now the peak amount of utility. And that's, first of all, this is another issue that I have with utilitarianism, is that it tries to turn philosophy, which is a very meta type of science, into a more empirical science. And it tries to measure something that really can't be measured at all, and we have no way to properly measure utility. But that's another issue I have with it. But the problem is you're operating under the assumption that this rehabilitated person, them being rehabilitated and better, is automatically the highest amount of utility, and also just assuming that the person's very existence, that person's actions that they have done in the past, don't create so much negative utility to distress people. Now that's why you could make it a utilitarian argument, specifically utilitarian, that some people are not worth rehabilitating. And that's also why you'll find that the most staunch advocates for rehabilitative justice are actually not utilitarians, because they don't want to have these situations where utilitarianism can justify foregoing rehabilitation.
Okay, so, well, actually, like you at the beginning of your argument right now said that utilitarianism tries to be empirical about something as like abstract as philosophy, correct?
Yeah, philosophy is a very meta. It's a very
Okay, metaphysical aspect. Okay,
yes.
is that correct, or you said something else?
Yes. Philosophy in
because
general is just very meta.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, because I don't want to like make an argument on something that you haven't not said. So just to thank you for clarifying. And like, I don't know how to say this, but just because the vast majority of philosophy can be identified as metaphysical in its application, in its logic, and in how it works and functions, doesn't mean that it has to be the only version of it. So, like, again, utilitarianism tries to put practice into something that is abstract. The point is that it does it in a purposely, like in a proper way, because you said that utility cannot be measured, but like it cannot be defined, but like that is not true. Utility is defined every single day depending on which context it is applied. If you ask utility in an economic setting, in an economics setting, sorry, is going to have any meaning. If you ask the term utility in in a physics setting, it's going to have another definition. Utility is one of those words where it has a multiple set of definitions depending on the context in which it is applied. And in fact, it's important to say this because many times if you go into any kind of physics course or like any economics course, every time they say the word utility, they are always 99% of times, unless you have a bad professor, they are going to explain the notion of utility in that specific context. Of course, you can contradict the interpretation they give in that particular context. By all means, everyone can do that. But the fact of the matter is that regardless of whether you or like any other person agrees or not with the definitions that are given in this separate context, utility still can be defined.
Yes, Luca, but what I've said is that it cannot be measured. That's the problem. We have no
No,
way of
it
knowing what,
can.
but it can't. How do you? Okay, so how do we know that the amount of utility I gain from drinking my Red Bull here is more than the amount of utility I gain from if I was to go and drink a glass of water? It's we know that it likely does because it gives me more pleasure, and that's we've already talked about that pleasure is the only intrinsic good and pain the only intrinsic bad in utilitarianism. So, but how much more? How much more? How do we not know that by
Well,
drinking?
but you see, you focused your argument on whether drinking Coca-Cola, for example, or whether drinking water, which one of the two is more utilitarian in this argument. But again, you forget one important aspect. You cannot, with just the word utilitarian alone, saying which one of the two is better, because to analyze the word what is more useful, you need to bring in another layer of analysis. In this regard, for example, what other layer do you want to put? Do you want to put the layer of enjoyment, or do we want to talk about the layer of biology, and so what is actually more healthy? Or maybe do you want to talk about the layer of time? See, this where I was getting at. The word utility in itself has no meaning. It absolutely requires a further layer of analysis, which is represented as the quote-unquote context, and hashtag Vosh, hashtag context. Like this, the point that I was trying to get at. The word utility has no meaning. You need a layer of
And
analysis. So the case of
that's understandable when you're at very low inconsequential things that really don't matter whatsoever and aren't going to have large impacts. But once you get up to the higher level of consequences, when you start talking about life and death, ought and oughtn't, is or isn't, things like that, that's when you start needing to be much more accurate on being able to measure, okay, does this produce more utility or does that produce more utility? That's why I don't like utilitarianism, is it's far too focused on an empirical measurement that we just simply don't have a way to empirically measure. It's a lot of guesswork and a lot of just, yeah, this makes logical sense. It's trying to be too logical on something that really doesn't have a logical framework. And it's also utilitarianism. It also tends to, this is where people start talking about things like rule utilitarianism, where it's not really utilitarianism anymore. It starts to devolve, and I could talk about this for hours, so I don't want to get too deep into it, but it starts to devolve into just more hedonistic consequentialism, and that really becomes very difficult to distinguish from deontology, even once you get into that area. And it's utilitarianism just kind of crumbles in a lot of places and allows for a lot of justifications that are not great. For example, I'm sure you've heard them before, but you have like the utility monster and the abhorrent conclusion, things like that, or repugnant conclusion.
Okay, so wait. Do you agree of what I said before? But like the word utility by itself has no meaning and you need a further layer.
Well, I understand what you're saying, Luca. I'm saying that even when you apply it into all of its different sections, you still have no way to measure it empirically like it tries
But
to
you
do.
you do, because exactly because like like let's put it in a very simple manner, okay? If I try to use the word, I'm going to use an example in a very complex context. So like life and death, like you cited before, okay? Imagine any kind of context where someone needs to be rehabilitated or not, and you need to think about the utilitarian aspect of it. Of course, every single person, you yourself right now are doing this. And I also did that. Every single person is going to put their own different layer of interpretation of the word utilitarian with different personal values. Like for instance, I'm just going to give you an example right now. I always value the dead person as a zero value, where instead of the person alive as a potential one, with one being the maximum, with all the decimal values inside
Yep.
it.
Yep.
Like every single person can be a value from 0 to 1 out instead, and where 0 represents death. That person is dead. You cannot in any way interact with that person or be on a funeral or like very fucked up shit. But like that is all you can do with that person. Instead, with a person alive, you can do so much more, and that is mine. layer of analysis. You
But it's
instead,
it's not as simple as just person's dead, we get none, person's alive, we get potentially one. You also have to understand and think of the effects that person has, like to go and use the extreme one again, because I love I'm a very big fan of using a hyperbolic analogy. I'm a very big fan of that because it makes the point get across. So to utilize Adolf Hitler again, had he been captured at the end of World War II rather than him dying, you had this potential here for him to give you that +1 utility that if he's rehabilitated. But now you also have all these other people out here that are having it. Now you have the chance of people trying to, before he's rehabilitated, undergo a raid on the prison that he's at to try and free him because the Nazi ideology is still alive and well. You have the chance of people turning him into a martyr if he did die in captivity. You have the chance of him running it like a prison gang where he's still able to get information out somehow to his followers, and it's as if he wasn't detained at all. You also have the chance of people just being distressed that the fact that the man who was responsible for the deaths of their loved ones still is existing, and all of these are potential areas of having a reduced amount of produced utility. So how do we not know that by having this +1 person existing and possibly reaching that +1, we're not inhibiting the amount of utility produced by other people? Maybe somebody is now not performing as well at their job because they're so stressed out from this existence, and so it's causing that to for them to underperform. Maybe another person is feeling that they were wronged and there's an injustice going on, so they're underperforming in different areas or not producing the amount of utility they want. How do we not know that +1 isn't inhibiting us from being able to get +10, 20, 30, if that makes sense?
So, that does, but like, this is exactly the point I was trying to get across. Right now, in your analysis, you put your own filters upon the word utility, and you try to experience and explain what is the notion of utility with your own values. And that is exactly what I was getting at. Every single person can put their own layers and own words, own meanings into the word utility.
I think I was very broad and didn't actually even define anything. I just said we have to consider all these things, not just the single.
Yeah, exactly. But like, because every single person puts their own meaning into the notion of utility, it is difficult to make an objective statement about utility. And in fact, that's exactly what utilitarianism tries to do. Is it tries to make objective and empirical measurements of something that is very, very subjective and very interpretable to the individual. You know. Yes, because like when you said yourself, right? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, that's also why it was brought up, the idea of. Are you familiar with the Repugnance Conclusion?
The what?
The Repugnant Conclusion?
No, I have never heard of it.
Okay, so this is one of the most common... Let me get it pulled up, actually. It is one of the most common critiques of utilitarianism. So, let me just go ahead. Basically... what it says is you have consider two situations here. You have situation one. A pregnant mother suffers from an illness which, unless she undergoes a simple treatment, will cause her child to suffer a permanent handicap. If she receives the treatment and is cured, her child will be perfectly normal. And situation two. A woman suffers from an illness which means that if she gets pregnant now, her child will suffer from a permanent handicap. She postpones her pregnancy a few months until she has recovered, and her child is born perfectly normal. So the question is, what should each one of these women do? What should each one do? In case one, obvious answer is that the mother ought to undergo the treatment since her actual child will thereby get a better life. However, it is problematic to appeal to this kind of reason when we turn to case 2. If the woman postpones a pregnancy, then the child that is brought into existence will not be identical to the child she would have had she decided to become pregnant before. Basically, that's because we don't know if this would ever be the same child. Would it be the same sperm, the same egg? Would it be genetically identical? We don't know. So what you're essentially suggesting is that in case 2, it is preferable that the child not exist than to be born with the handicap if it is up to the woman. That's the repugnant conclusion. From a utilitarian case, it's saying that, like, oh yeah, obviously, like, why would you have this child be born with this handicap? No, have it born without a handicap. But that's essentially saying that nope, it'd be better for that child to potentially not exist.
There is kind of a flaw in this argument, and it is a kind of a cynic counter argument with what I'm gonna make. But if you study history, right, you see certain discoveries being made by certain individuals in certain contexts and such. Have you ever considered the most important discoveries and such could have been made before or even after by someone else? What I'm saying here, and it is one of those theories which is very cynic but very interesting. I read that somewhere some time ago, is that potentially for example, Leonardo da Vinci or Einstein or all of these people are potentially relevant in the grand scheme of things when you take into account that in centuries it is very likely that someone will do the exact same thing given the same situation. So what I'm saying here is that there is actually an argument being made to kind of contradict this logic, but yes, every single human matters and it is important, but the achievements that one human can reach can also be reached under the logic of an alternative universes and such by other people in other contexts. And this is very complicated because you can either interpret this in either a very depressive manner, or you can interpret this as a very expressive aspect of things. To me, the idea that what we do could potentially be done by others in another time, it is in a sense comfort. Hold up, one sec, bear back, one sec. Something happened. One sec.
Okay. How's it going, chat? Zen, wet paper, exhausted. Sorry I haven't been talking to the chat very much. I've been chatting with my buddy Luca here. So how's it going, everybody? Does anybody have anything they want to throw in? Any thoughts that they'd like to share with the class? I didn't expect this to become a case of me arguing about why utilitarianism was bad. But hey, I'm here for it. I don't like utilitarianism. I don't like it at all. Give me one. I'm going to run into my kitchen right here and grab my other Red Bull. Okay, I'm back.
I'm back as well. Sorry.
You're good, buddy.
They're saying I should open my webcam. Do you want me to turn on my webcam?
It's up to you. You could if you want to.
Sure. Just let me catch a breath. 1 second.
All good. That means I've got to do this. I've got to.
Okay, I'm here.
Window capture. I got to add in a not League of Legends. Jesus, I was just playing League before I came here. A Discord. I've got to.
Okay.
Trim it all down. haven't done this in a minute. Okay, there we go.
Don't worry, take your time. I'm just here cuddling my cat.
It's a cute cat. I was talking with this cat earlier. Alrighty. Anyhow, so I'm actually gonna send you an image on Discord, and this is another. So this right here is another example of the repugnant conclusion, and basically, it's the question of which is the preferable society. Society A, where it's a very high quality of life for everybody that's involved in it, but it's a much smaller population, because height of the graph is quality of life, width of the graph is population size, or population Z, where it's a very low quality of life, but it's a much larger population. So which to you would be the preferable option of the two?
So the A is very high quality of life.
But a much smaller population.
Very low but positive quality of life. A, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what most utilitarians would say. But what you're essentially doing is saying that it's preferable for us to have a smaller population, for much more of those people to not exist or be removed in some way. So some people can utilize that. So if you come to the repugnant conclusion, population A is preferable. That naturally leads into the repugnant solution. And you know who was an adamant believer in the repugnant solution, unironically?
It is kind of flawed to...
Our boy Thanos.
No, okay, but like it's kind of flawed to make the logic by choosing community A, which is less populated but more people in general, like more, they are better conditions. It is kind of flawed, in my opinion, to say that you're saying that the other people should not exist, because the idea is that if people are going to be born, sure, they should be born anyway. But like, if we see, for instance, the logic that like smaller communities are better in general. My webcam froze. Nice.
Oh, it's because I clicked off of Discord so I could see the chat. That's all it was.
Oh, fair. No, as I was saying, basically, if we see, for example, on this analysis, we see that on average, smaller societies are better in terms of quality of life. We should say, well, it is better to have smaller communities than larger communities. Of course, we then are going to have like different communities and such, but like the main point I was trying to say here is that it is kind of weird to put it in such a position, in my opinion. But I feel like this whole repugnant argument feels kind of lackluster in a sense.
It's really just a thought problem to show the flaws here, in the sense of, because what you essentially do when you have that repugnant conclusion of life would be better with less, then you suddenly come into the repugnant solution, which is the Thanos it. That was the issue, is Thanos realized that there's a limited amount of resources in the universe. Life would exponentially increase for the people over time eventually. Obviously not right away, but it would increase for them over time because they have more access to those resources with fewer people. So we eliminate half the universe, quality of life shoots up, population shoots down. Congratulations, the repugnant solution. And that's why actually so many people struggled to dislike Thanos, is because to a lot of utilitarians, it could make sense. It could, like, in a vacuum, ignoring the fact that you're murdering a bunch of people, it could make sense. Now, that said, the fact that you are murdering a bunch of people makes you feel uneasy does lead into the fact that something that a lot of people forget about normative ethics. A lot of people, when they talk about their normative ethical frameworks, is they just automatically assume, oh, I'm a utilitarian. That means I stick to the premise of utility at all times. Or I'm a deontologist. I stick to the actions at all times. Or I'm a virtue ethicist. I stick to virtues at all times. That's actually not the case. Every single one does pull from the others to an extent. You may sometimes ignore utility if it would result in something that is so absolutely horrid to you that you say, no, I just can't do that. That's because humans are fallible, they're not perfect, and we do have our own ways of interpreting the world.
Absolutely. So, I feel like my original argument got derailed a bit. When I said that deaf invitations are not good because they go against utilitarianism, is because, as always, I'm thinking about what's the most efficient way to convert the bigots, or at least even normies, into more leftist positions, because that's what matters to me. Personally, I personally don't care much about personal grievance and such. To me, it is just the maximum effort to try and bring as many people towards the left as possible.
Yeah, no,
So
I agree that this is not very good optically. It is very bad optics wise for bringing people to the left. I agree with that statement. That's just to
yeah,
show the good faith.
because this is exactly the point. Like, let's make the argument. Let's go for extremes since you like them. If we managed under a careful, I strongly believe this, like based upon the fact that we have seen ISIS warriors being radicalists, being converted into becoming going back to the civilian population and working back into helping their peers and such. Just like that, I feel there is, and they also contribute more towards rehabilitation because they can communicate with other ISIS warriors and explain their own person. Like there is a more deeper connection between them, and as such, it is easier to convert. Exactly because of that, having based upon these sociological and psychological proof, it is extremely important to denote that if we, under the extreme, imagined that Hitler could have been rehabilitated under a very careful, controlled environment, and he would have unironically changed his mind, we could actually make the claim that him changing his mind could have had a major impact in terms of global impact of Nazism. In fact, he would not become a martyr. And in fact, I strongly believe that as a matter of fact, that even today, fascism would not be the same.
I don't think it'd be the
Sorry,
same. I don't
Nazism.
think yeah, Nazism specifically. I understood what you meant. I understood what you meant. Yeah, the thing is though, like,
Because I
well,
know, like, sorry, Eva, I just want to say
go
one
ahead.
thing. I know that for many people, the idea of converting Nazi is uncomfortable, bad, ugly. But like,
Well,
again,
it's
I'm just thinking about what can be done to mostly bring about a leftist universe, or at least leftist society. And we need to realize that right now, their right is
yeah.
winning the optics game.
Yes, I
So
agree. I agree with that. It's a critique I've had. Again, I want to clarify this for people out there watching. I am not an anarchist. So if you were coming here expecting me to just shit on Luca and talk about how bad he is and how base the anarchists are, no, I'm not an anarchist. I'm an orthoid. I am an orthodox Marxist. So I do not agree with anarchists a lot. And now that's one thing I will say optically. I was talking with Ray about this today while we were in the car, or no, yesterday while we were in the car. Anarchists specifically have a problem where they will say something very out there, very outlandish, very just to kind of get people's attention, and it'll just be extremely polarizing, and they refuse to go into detail on what it means. Actually, they refuse to rephrase things. They just want to make as much of a shock factor as possible, and it ends up hurting a lot of people. For example, the one that happened most recently, the abolish families that happened yesterday or something like that.
I
That's
completely fucking ignore it, because if I start in that discourse, I'm
that's
going
that's
to cause another mess.
abolish families, abolish time. It's like when you say these phrases, they sound absolutely horrible to your average person, your normies and your libs and whatnot. They sound absolutely horrible. But when you start talking about what it actually means, you start getting into it, it's not as bad as it sounds. And the problem that anarchists have is that they like to just get that shock factor out there. They like to just immediately say this crazy outlandish thing to get people to go like, what the fuck are you saying? And then just leave it at that. It's terrible optically. It's absolutely terrible for optics. That's why, yes, I agree. The right is winning on the optics game. Now, I also agree with you in another sense that it is not out of character or impossible to be able to convert these people. An example is myself. A lot of people know this about me because I've been very public about my political journey. I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I was very right wing. I was a little racist. Admittedly, I was a little racist. I was extremely transphobic. I was extremely homophobic. I was a fundamentalist Christian. I was a right libertarian that voted for Donald Trump. And I was this close to biting that authoritarian bullet and ending up going down the fascist right wing pipeline. I was this close. But luckily, I had conversations with some of my more left leaning friends. I got more educated on politics. I became more involved on leftist spaces on Discord and YouTube and whatnot, specifically Vosh. And slowly but surely, I also saw the issues with capitalism as is, and because I experienced them at the peak of COVID. I lost my job and got evicted at the same time. At the peak of COVID, that's what made me start scratching my head and saying, maybe this capitalism shit isn't the right call. And that's what really pushed me over. So it is possible for people who are extremely right wing to be pushed over to the left. That is a very possible thing. So I agree with you that we should be able to talk to these people. Now, that said, what it comes down to is there is a line that some people, especially when you're part of marginalized groups, such as being trans, such as being a person of color, such as being homosexual, neurodivergent, any of that, and you experience constant lines of bigotry, constant waves of it, where eventually you may start to just see these other people as not worthy of the moral consideration. And I don't think that's a necessarily a problem. A more real example here is with Gami, however the fuck you pronounce her name. I've always said it Gami. And how vindictive she has been with other trans women in the Twitter sphere. I
completely understand.
Yeah. So some people might say that because it's very, I don't know for sure because she's joked about it before and she's memed about it, but it's very likely, considering the high rate of trans suicides, that Gami has contributed at least in some way to a trans suicide someplace. I don't want to say that she has for sure because there's no way to know that, but with her joking about it and then like the amount of harassment she puts out, it's very possible. It's very possible. And so when you think about stuff like that, some people might consider her being as not worthy of the moral consideration. That's why they'll send these invitations, the low tier gods, the Huey Lewis and the new stuff.
Can I just say one thing on this?
Yep.
Like, I had a discussion with other people being marginalized and such, and I totally understand why someone would do these things, but I'm saying that the better solution would be to disengage completely. And because the result action would be that by disengaging, you're not giving them both attention and fuel.
But how do you disengage?
You simply stop interacting, especially especially in the online sphere. Especially in that online sphere, we have many tools to stop engaging, from muting buttons to blocking buttons. If we're instead talking about in real life context, the situation becomes more complicated, of course. But like, again, we're forgetting something. Especially in Europe, the majority of people are racist in Europe because there are the vast majority of Europeans that live in rural areas. They do not ever experience different cultures than the one they come from. The direct result of this is that people generally here in Europe have the fear factor that brings them to not in any way just to interact with people that are different from compared to them.
Luca,
and I can't Oh, sorry.
Let's be honest though. Like you yourself have received a lot of harassment on Twitter. I have as well. We both are people who have. You've actually gotten way more than I am though. So don't take that as me trying to downplay how much you've gotten. How effective are these? How effective actually are these block and mute buttons? If somebody really wants to come after you, they register new accounts. They have their privates that they come in and look at. Your only option then at that point is to private your account and hope that nobody leaks anything from your account. And then what you're doing is you're essentially silencing these yourself from being able to speak out about these issues or call out these people that are attacking you. And now by disengaging, you're really just giving them more of a platform than anything else. Because at the end of the
You aren't, because see, this is the point. Exactly like you when we were in middle school and they told you not to give space to the child behaving like a fucking moron. Sorry for the words. The same absolute argument can work exactly for the internet.
But it doesn't, Luca. We see that it doesn't. Like, look, if that argument worked, people like fucking Destiny would never have the amount of platform that they do. People like the Quartering, Steven Crowder, these people who they actively harass and demean people of different groups.
Hold up, there is a bit of a confusion. We cannot compare the situation with Gami with the situation with Destiny. Destiny is a content creator, and as such, you cannot disengage from Destiny.
Gami got banned off of Twitter and still is already back up to almost 1,000 followers, despite her reputation.
Yes, because the only thing you can do to what I'm trying to say is that if they are single individuals, you can block them. It's going to be effective and it's not going to give them fuel. But especially if you feel marginalized. Because if you are not marginalized, or at least you can I don't know how to say this. If you are marginalized and don't want to put yourself into the spot by talking to others and especially bigots and such, and engaging with someone, you can see you should do that. You should block and just ignore. You cannot marginalize person. But what I'm saying is that as a marginalized person, will have much more effect into converting people that are bigots towards you. It is almost like a paradox. The people that mostly hate you because they don't know who you are. As such, you presenting yourself to them will have a much more effect than, for example, on the trans issues. A trans person presenting themselves, arguing directly, will have much more effect than a cis person arguing with another cis, which is bigoted.
I understand what you're saying. But even still, that hasn't really been demonstrated at all. Because in fact, we've seen the exact opposite. When people block the person harassing them, it's the person harassing them generally finds a way around the block. I've experienced it. You've experienced it. We can't act like that's not what happens.
Yes, it does, but I don't block a lot. I blocked in my entire experience right now just 50 people out of all the hundreds that probably harass me. So I can tell you, when I block someone, yes, they can get around, but the chance that they do that, especially in the prolonged period, is extremely low, because eventually they're gonna get bored. Because remember, you're talking with people who behave for the most part like bullies. As such,
there's another example. Sorry, Ray just reminded me of it in the chat here. Ray and I, when I was having a Twitter beef with Sorvia, we ended up having somebody, not related to Sorvia, it was not connected to Sorvia, I know this, but somebody got involved, created an alternate account, and literally doxed both of us. When we blocked them, they also doxed our unborn child at the time. When we blocked them, they started saying that if we didn't unblock them, they were going to out me, who's not out IRL yet, to my parents, who are very transphobic. They were going to out me to Ray's parents, who don't know but are less transphobic. And it was just, they were basically threatening to affect our lives outside of just Twitter as well, when we chose to just block them. It's a case of these kind of things do happen to people. And so why why would it be wrong for them to stand up and fight back rather than just blocking and laying down and taking it?
Because your fighting back is extremely limited in its effect. You're not doing anything to stop them, because even if you send them a death invitation at the end of the day, they can just go through with whatever they can do. Like like this is exactly what I was getting at. By doing a death invitation, you're doing nothing but just entrenching that person in their prejudices and hate. And this is why I'm saying that the best solution, if you are so mad, so angry that you do not in any way want to engage with them, just simply block. It is going to be much better. It is going to be better for everyone, and you're also not going to dehumanize someone, which was my first argument at the beginning, which went underseen. But like again.
Yeah, but again, that's the case of some people will eventually, after they've been harassed or pushed to a point. I can tell you right now, I didn't think of that person that was doxing myself, my wife, and my unborn child. I didn't think of that as a human. That to me was just a unknown entity that was out here doing nothing but trying to hurt me. So it activated the fight or flight sense. And well, speaking for myself, I had flight completely eliminated thanks to the army, so it goes right into the fight sense. And what actually ended up working was the fact that I quote tweeted them. I called them a bunch of names and told them, go ahead and do it, you don't scare me.
Okay.
But then they stopped.
So again, as I said already in the beginning, I understand why someone would do this. At the same time, I'm saying that the better solution would be something else.
Well,
like
so I think I think that becomes because you're looking at it from your own normative ethical framework, whereas there's another normative ethical framework that you see a lot in specifically anarchist and far left areas. Notice that, and I point that out specifically where it's seen a lot, because it's also the same areas on the left that you see these people getting very aggressive and defensive, and that is virtue ethics. How familiar are you with virtue ethics?
I only know the term it's used for describing how you should always act properly in regards to certain notions, but that's really limited the knowledge I have on it.
So
It's not
virtue
my field
ethics. Yeah. I describe myself as a virtue ethicist myself, and it's fantastic. I think virtue ethics, because the three primary normative ethical frameworks are deontology, virtue ethicism, and consequentialism. However, when most people talk about consequentialism, they're usually talking about classical utilitarianism. There are other forms of consequentialism as well, but it's usually they're going back to classical utilitarianism. Now, virtue ethics is that, unlike deontology or consequentialism, rather than focusing on the actions and the outcome of the actions, it focuses on the virtues of the person. So consequentialists might talk about virtues as traits that yield good outcomes, and deontologists might talk about virtues as traits that are possessed by people who do fulfill their duties. Virtue ethicists specifically avoid talking about those traits at all. They just say that it's a much more fundamental thing. For example, to say that somebody is honest, it doesn't mean that they don't lie because they shouldn't lie, or because lying is would cause pain to somebody and that's a bad outcome. So those two, the first one, they shouldn't lie as a duty. They should always tell the truth. That's fulfilling that duty. Second one is a consequence. If they do lie, it creates a bad outcome for somebody. A virtue ethicist would say an honest person does not lie because to lie would be dishonest. Does that make sense? It's much more abstract. You're muted. I can't hear you, buddy.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I was so sorry. I said that no, it's not very clear. I'm kind of confused. Actually, can you make another example? Sorry, really.
Yep. So let's see here. So a virtue is a disposition that's well entrenched in its possessor. It's something that, as we say, goes all the way down, unlike a habit, such as being a tea drinker. To notice, expect, value, feel, desire, choose, act, and react in a certain characteristic way. So, I'll use courageous. Using courageous as an example, okay? Somebody who has the virtue of courage, they act in a way that puts themselves in danger for the betterment of others, because if they didn't do that, then they would not be courageous. Whereas a consequentialist does that, acts in the way that would put themselves in danger for the betterment of others, because at the end it creates betterment from others. And a deontologist does that because they are expected to. Virtue ethics focuses much more on the actual trait itself, the actual virtue. Again,
That seems so weird to me.
An honest person does not tell the truth because it's the truth, but because to not tell the truth would be dishonest, and therefore they're not honest.
It's much more complicated than that. Like, especially when it comes to traits, people have very mutable traits.
And so that's why in virtue ethicism we talk about two primary things. We talk about virtues, but then we also talk about practical wisdom. So practical wisdom, it comes into effect when we talk about exactly what you're going into here. And it's somebody who is generally virtuous, be it generous, honest, courageous, whatever, may not necessarily be morally good. And that's because there's a very wide range and a lot of times faulty application of virtue terms. So a lot of times people will use a virtuous term and just apply it to somebody and say that, like, oh, this person's honest. They're an honest person, when in reality what they're saying is that they just don't cheat when they're playing cards. That the fact that they don't cheat doesn't necessarily mean that they have the honest virtue trait. However, if they make it a point to never be dishonest and they strive at all times to never be dishonest, then they have the honest virtue trait. I can see your face. Your gears are turning really hard.
Yeah, because it's weird, because this wisdom you said, what was its name? Wisdom?
Practical wisdom.
Thank you. Sorry.
Practical wisdom. We talk about that because there's two main features of practical wisdom. So first of all, humans are very fallible. We've talked about that before, and virtue ethics actually tries to bring that into consideration. Humans are fallible, and a lot of times they're uninformed. They don't know everything that's going on around them. They don't know everything that's going on with someone else. They don't know the proper application for things, but they still try to act on practical wisdom of right and wrong. So that brings out the two characteristics. First one is that it characteristically comes only with experience of life. That's why we tend to associate wisdom with people who have life experience. People who have done more things in life tend to have more wisdom on right and wrong. And the second is the wise agent's capacity to recognize some features of a situation as more important than others, or indeed in that situation as the only relevant ones. So they could actually pick out parts of this situation and be like, okay, none of that other shit matters, just these little things are what we need to focus on.
And let's say I need a more practical example, because otherwise I get lost. I'm a practical person. I need the practice in my life. Let's say, how does this virtue ethics arguments work, for example, in the extreme case we talked about with rehabilitating Hitler?
Okay, so Hitler, if he was to be captured rather than it would come down to the case of what is the virtuous and practically wise decision to make here. So we look at the situation and say, like, okay, ignoring all these other things, what did he do? He basically overthrew the Weimar Republic. He did the goddamn Holocaust, and is directly responsible.
Fair. He did all of that. Okay.
Yeah, so we start
Go on.
examining all this. We start examining all this stuff, and we start to say like, okay, but compassion is also a virtue, and so then we take somebody who is wise. We need to find somebody that is. We would use our own intuition, our own practical wisdom to determine, based off of all these things, is it more important that he be removed from humanity based off of these things that he did than it is to have the virtue of compassion and forgiveness. And if that is said yes, then it's likely that he would be killed. However, most of the time, what would happen, what I would guess, and I can't begin to guess for sure because I'm not pretending to be a wise person myself, I'd say he probably would be put in a rehabilitative situation because of the idea that you've brought out that, oh, if we could rehabilitate him, he'd be very, very useful later on. That's just a wise decision to make.
Yes, but like, I'm so confused right now because you explained all of this logic about virtue ethics when talking about how marginalized people should be like how they feel about behaving in a certain setting, and I don't get how that virtue ethics apply here.
That comes into the practical wisdom where what they're doing is we're talking about that second trait of practical wisdom where some features of a situation are more important than others. If you remember correctly, all of the most of the people that you were arguing with over the past week when it comes to these memes, people like Maxine, Lux, about the only person I can think of that wasn't doing this was Bellamy. But most of them were actually saying that, like, okay, yeah, I don't support these death threats being sent to these people who don't deserve it. Lux said that. Maxine said that eventually. They all said that. Bellamy was about the only person that just was like, no, fuck you, I can do bad things. And let me just clarify here really quickly. Bellamy has always frustrated me in that area, so I understand. I understand where you're coming from. I specifically a situation with you, Luca, I remember begging Bellamy to accept your apology on something else, and yeah, just would not do it. But so I understand where your frustrations there. The point here is though that they were using the second part of the practical wisdom to realize that what is in this entire drama, what is more important? These low-tier God memes, Huey Lewis and the News memes, American Psycho memes, or the fact that ableism has been largely normalized in liberal spaces. It wasn't a case of people trying to deflect, like it got framed. A lot of people kept framing it as, oh, they're trying to deflect and whatnot. It's actually more so that, no, we're much more concerned with the fact that ableism has become largely normalized in liberal and left-lib spaces. The use of the R slur, calling people mentally ill or deranged or unhinged whenever you don't like them, and then having zero consequence for that because these people are involved in very cliquish, very large friend groups that are almost cult of personality levels where they just don't experience those consequences because 2 days later, all their friends are just going to be laughing at the next meme that they post. So it came to the idea that these they're using they are focusing on what they felt was a more important thing, and once that gets addressed, then I guarantee you people will be more willing to talk about the flaws in sending these memes. I know Celine specifically mentioned it on her Twitter. Now, her and I don't follow each other anymore, but I see her come up in my feed every now and then. She said something specifically that was like, I will never consider sending a low-tier God meme to someone who has accused me of being a rapist and harassed me or trivialized my trauma as the same as or as bad as using the R slur against someone. And I agree with that. I feel like the ableism is a much bigger issue than these types of memes, and I don't know.
Yes,
maybe
they are in the logic of things. Yes, Like, yes, they have a bigger effect. Ableism can have a bigger effect, but like, as again, as social studies have proven, posting death-related memes online can have a strong impact upon people weaker and in this moment to suicide. So, and especially with how socially contagious of the platforms are, this can really become a big risk.
I agree.
With all of that being said, the main critique that many people were giving, at least on liberal spaces, and I think like people on that were protecting this behavior were not understanding, is that people in on many quotes liberal spaces were against the notion of dehumanization. They were against that notion and said that like it is stupid to be against dehumanization, but then use dehumanization tactics whenever you feel you want them, because that becomes a freedom that you choose just for yourself when it becomes comfortable to you. So the whole argument of virtue ethics kind of falls apart, because if you are say but like you just behave like a hypocritical person saying that people should not do X, but you're going to do X because you feel compelled to do so. What virtue do you represent there?
That
Dishonesty?
No, it's a case of that. You're thinking about virtue ethics too much like deontology. Virtue ethics does not compel you to do anything. It's you possess these traits. So deontology is the one that talks about the compulsion and duties. Deontology is the one that says like, oh, if you
Okay,
possess these traits, then you are compelled to act this certain way.
what
It's
trait
simply
do you have by bringing forward double standards
yeah,
exactly?
none. That's the point of it in virtue ethics is that if you do something that is not in line within a virtue, then you do not possess that virtue. That's what it is. For example, if somebody goes out there and they lie about who they are, they cheat in video games, they um, uh, uh, are just generally dishonest on everything, then they simply do not possess the honest trait.
Okay, but
It's not
then
a case of like, oh, because honesty is a virtue, then you are compelled to try and be honest as possible. It's not how it works. This is much these are so virtue ethics is much more based in Confucianism, Plato, Aristotle. Those were like the three first people to talk about virtue ethics, and so they're much more focused on bettering yourself as a human to gain these virtues. We enter in the progress to gain them, and that's these
okay,
virtues
and
are
I
what we
totally
strive
understand that.
towards.
Yes, okay, I understand that, but then you basically agree with me on this. But being having double standards does not. You
No,
said
I
it
do agree.
yourself.
That's why I've said that these things are not bad or not good. I've said that they are bad and that
Yes,
they shouldn't be done.
okay, but like
However,
again, the argument of so if we know that these things are bad because they dehumanize,
yes,
we then go into the context on whether someone is being harassed should use them or not.
yes, but
And
the point here
again,
that we're making again underneath virtue ethics is that we're using practical wisdom to determine that they are not the bigger issue here. The bigger issue is the ableist things. They're wanting to focus on the ableist. Literally, what they're doing is they're going and saying that like, yeah, that's bad. I don't care. This though, this, hey, hey,
yes, but like
over
this
here.
is exact, like this is exactly what was happening. Like I know some people in liberal spaces that have been legitimately been ableist. I've been against them, and I am against ableism. And but like there were legit people in liberal spaces that, like me, were saying both ableism and death threats or death invitations, sorry, are bad because
The problem
they
that
both
people were
they
having though,
both can
Luca,
lead.
the problem people were having though is that there was not nearly as much of an uproar over this ableism than there was over these death memes and the death invitations.
That is because whether we like it or not, it is a bit bad to say in terms of optics, but like society nowadays is very ableist. whether we
Yeah,
like it or
and
not.
that's the problem that's the
Yes, it
problem
is,
that
and
they're
it is,
having.
and yes, and exactly, and it is a big problem. But like we have been grown into like we know, but not all form of ableism are necessarily dehumanizing. We know because, for example, when I could not for like I'm gonna make a personal example of this so you can understand what I mean. When I wanted to join the army many years ago, but I could not because I am blind from one eye. Like I
Oh.
chose to not to go there because of the limitations of this issue. You could say that was ableist. Yes, because it will cause me problems in relation to my society problems, but that was not necessarily dehumanizing. Like it was understandable in the context, but like special forces required a good sight, so it was understandable based on the context. Given that we understand that not all forms of ableism are necessarily dehumanizing, although many are by all means. Given that many people were saying that death invitations are always dehumanizing, so like I'm making devil's advocate argument here. If you have
You're essentially
something,
saying that these memes are the bigger issue over the ableism.
no.
Okay, so
The what the idea was in these spaces. I'm not saying I share that idea, but like the idea in these spaces was that given that ableism is not always dehumanizing, but death invitations are always dehumanizing. One is always dehumanizing, as such is always worse than the other. That was the logic in these spaces. I personally have my critiques of this, but that was the arguments being
okay.
thrown around in these spaces.
Yeah, and I understand that argument, and that's why I wanted to talk about the ethics here today, is because that's a very deontological mindset. Is that, oh, this thing is dehumanizing, and so therefore it is always bad, and we need to, the moment that it is brought up, focus on that. Where that's a very deontological. You have a duty to focus on the dehumanizing part of things. And while I can understand that argument, I can agree with it. As a virtue ethicist, it allows me to go in and look at it with practical wisdom and say that, like, okay, what actually is happening here in this situation? Which is worse? We talk about it on an actual case by case basis.
Absolutely. If we just need to take sorry for the swearing I'm going to make now in the
You're
next few
good.
seconds.
You're good.
Of course, if we fucking look at like memes and such, a fucking meme is not going to have any relevance.
But that's
Like,
what
not,
it is, Luca.
it's sorry, it's
That's
wrong. It's wrong to say. Sorry, it's wrong to say it's not going to have any relevance.
but
It's going to have relevance because, anyways, it's ending death invitation is going to have an effect on those people who feel suicidal.
but
So it's
Luca,
going to have.
that is the whole point that the anarchists and now myself are making, is because when we actually look at this situationally, because that's the whole point. Well, if you remember what I said, is the second part of practical wisdom is the capacity to recognize some features of a situation as more important than others.
But if we say that memes about sending death invitations are not okay, are okay under certain contexts, I'm
I'm
making
not going to
another.
say that, and I've even gone on record to say in a tweet thread
No.
about
Okay,
that I am against that.
okay. No. Okay, I understand that, but like,
However,
if there are those people that say that it is valid, those memes
yeah,
are valid under certain conditions.
and I really don't
Then
care what those people have to say. I think that they're stupid and they're not actually understanding anything about even their own moral ideologies or their own moral frameworks. I would say that they're being children that are getting involved in a space that is above them intellectually and emotionally. I think that they shouldn't be voicing their ideas if they're going to have that low reductive mindset. However, because of the fact that as a virtue ethicist, and I know that many other anarchists are also virtue ethicists, we could analyze the situation. We could say which is more problematic and needs to be focused on more. The fact that somebody sent a low tier God meme to a friend of Gami, or the fact that some liberal somewhere got mad at an anarchist and called them the R slur. I am always going to say that that R slur is more important than that low tier God meme.
Yes, so I understand your point, but like if we say, if we analyze by context, like you're saying, and say that there is that like we understand that in some context LTG memes, like I'm not saying you said this, but like these people, right? These people have said that in a certain context it is okay, or it may be funny. What stops memes about ableism to be funny as well? Like this, the ultimate devil's advocate.
No, I completely understand that. It's again, you don't really have a way to stop it outright, because again, unlike deontology where you have a duty to not do these things or to do these specific things, or unlike consequentialism where you have an obligation to recognize consequences, virtue ethics, its whole premise is on individual situations, examining these situations, examining, okay, what was the virtue behind this action, examining, was this actually important, does this actually matter?
Okay.
The whole point of virtue ethics is to go in situationally and not have just a large credo that says, yes, this is always bad, this is always good, or any of that stuff. That is the whole point of virtue ethics.
Okay, so if we just say that we need to understand, like we need to analyze every single case, of course that is going to bring the best result, because then you can make complicated analysis and such and yada yada. Of course that is the better system, and I understand that by all means. The point is that especially when it comes to messaging, you need to make general assumptions. And this is where the whole debacle was, because you said right now the virtue ethics specializes mostly on, if I understood you properly, correct me if I'm wrong, it focuses mostly on case by case scenarios.
So no, it doesn't focus mostly on that. It just does it better than the other two. It's much better at virtue ethics. Does have broad overarching areas, and that's virtues. Is neither one using ableism or sending these death invitation memes. Neither one is virtuous, so they should be bad. However, we then go into the woods of it, into the thickets of it, and say, okay, they're both bad. We've already established that. Neither one fall among a virtuous trait. But which one is worse and needs to be focused on more? We use our practical wisdom to examine that and say that, okay, the ableism is in this case, or whatnot. Virtues are your overarching area, and then practical wisdom is where you actually go in and examine it.
But then let me ask you, what is the overarching virtue in sending death invitations?
There isn't. That's why I just said it's not a virtuous action. So therefore, it is bad
but
also.
it's not by your point of view. I understand that, but
so
I'm asking you.
Oh, I love this. Let me guess. You're gonna go into, is it a subjective virtue or is it
No. I'm going to ask you personally, based on the feedback of these people, what is the feedback that you like? What is the virtue? Like, no, sorry. What do you think these people think the virtue is in sending death invitations?
I don't think that they think it's virtuous. I don't think that they think that it's a good thing. I think that they are examining it practically and saying that it is not a big deal. So it's not something to be worried about. I don't think that they're trying to say that it's morally good. That's a very important distinction to make. There's a major difference between morally bad, morally neutral, morally good. It's a major difference.
Okay, no. Oh, but by the way, small parenthesis for all the viewers to understand before we get clipped out of context for every fucking sentence I say. Both ableism and death invitations are bad. I do not condone any of those. I've said it multiple times. So before you cancel me for the 15th time, those are my actual positions. So we're arguing this out of purely philosophical interest. So please, I ask you kindly to not cancel me for the 15th time.
Don't worry. From the people I've seen in the chat here, we've only got about 7 viewers right now. For the people I've seen in the chat here, I think we should be good. They're good people.
No, okay. I'm just saying because despite
the
me
VOD and
saying
stuff.
No, but like, despite me saying at the beginning of a discussion of this virtue ethics discussion, despite me saying that both ableism and death invitations to me are bad, I know that at some point I made the argument, but like, if someone says that death invitations memes are okay, then the logical conclusion is to someone that thinks that both of them are bad is that then ableist memes sometimes are good. I said that because that was the idea that some people were bringing forward, and I said it many times, but I do not agree with that idea. I just don't want to be cancelled with 55th time. Try to
I hear you.
understand
I
me,
hear you.
Emily.
Again, I hear you. Again, I'm going to go ahead and just repeat what I said. Is that those people that are saying that they are morally good, I think that they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, and they need to actually do some research on what ethics and morality is, because that's actually the thing I have the most notes on, and that's what the fuck is morality, because I think people.
I know that you prepared that topic, but I'm sorry, but I'm not going to get into that debate because that is so fucking personal.
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna say that essentially, to be as reductive as I can about it. There's two primary ways of defining morality. You could do it normatively or descriptively. Descriptively is certain codes of conduct put forward by a society or a group. Or accepted by an individual for their own behavior, and then normatively is a code of conduct that, given specified conditions, would be put forward by all rational people. So those are like the two primary ways of doing it.
Yes, and I told you I'm not getting into any of that because people have their own morality, and honestly, when it comes to morality, it always feels like a circle jerk because at the end of the day, it is extremely personal stuff that gets intertwined with personal experiences and such, and it's very difficult to convince someone.
It is that way if you're talking about it descriptively. If you're talking about it normatively, no, it's not. But again, we're gonna
what should be done. What should be done in certain contexts.
Yeah, so
but like even then we just had this discussion right now. We just had this discussion about right now in terms of like what should someone marginalized being harassed do. We literally just had the discussion right now, and we basically concluded almost nothing. Like, well, it is not true, but like it was not concluded much because as we said, you had your personal experience.
Sorry, pause 1 second. If this guy in chat thinks that he's going to come in here and try and make anti-vax arguments that have zero logical medical backing to them, you can get the fuck out of here. I'm going to ban you. All right, go ahead, Luca.
No, sorry, I was just saying that basically it is just weird to try, like, we didn't reach a strong conclusion because you thought like you had your own experience of being harassed and because of your characteristics and such, and so that was the result. I have been harassed for other reasons. I've received death threats myself, actual death threats, not death invitations, actual death threats. And as such, I had different experience. When it comes to normative and morals, it is extremely difficult to reach an agreement with such overarching different experiences.
Yeah, and that's the descriptive sense when it comes to morality. That's that you're talking about it descriptively, like, is one of the ways. There's also normatively that it's basically just again, we don't want to get into it. You said you don't want to. I really don't want to because it's a very long, deep conversation. But for the TLDR of normative, it refers to it refers to people as what are called moral agents, and if moral agents are both rational. What is it? Let me check my. So they have to meet certain intellectual, volitional, and rational conditions. If they meet those, which generally are they able to communicate? Are they able to think logically and rationally? Things like that. Just, typical functioning people, they're considered moral agents. And therefore, if all moral agents would accept a code of conduct as being moral, if you're talking about it normatively, that's when you get into more meta ethics and you start talking about objective morality, moral realism versus subjectivism, relativism, and nihilism. But yeah, meta ethics is a very in-depth and complicated subject that I don't think either of us want to go into right now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then you also have to differentiate between legal code and moral code or societal code, because just because something is legal or expected by society does not necessarily make it moral. And something can be a moral code while still being against what society is expecting or against what the legal code is expecting, all that kind of stuff. The whole point of me bringing up these normative ethics and morality is that you were asking what kind of virtue these people who advocate for these death invitations being sent give, and they don't display any of the virtues, and that's why we then go into the practical wisdom of it. Is the non-virtuous action really worth focusing on right now, or is there something else that needs to be focused on more? And the conclusion that they came to, and the conclusion that I myself came to, and this is why I wasn't out there decrying all these memes and everything, because admittedly I've sent them myself before. I have sent them to extreme bigots, to TERFs that have just harassed me. I've been banned off of Twitter a couple times, well, not banned, but suspended for saying these kind of comments. And I've done better about it. I'm on my nice girl arc, and I'm not doing stuff like that anymore as much as I want to. But the point is that we go in and examine it and say, like, okay, no, it's at the end of the day, they are just little memes that, while they are bad, they are awful, and we need to address it eventually. More importantly, we need to address why they were brought about, and that's for this ableism thing. I think exactly what really started this was when Maxine made a comment to Winooski, because Winooski called somebody an arslur for disliking another person. Mm-hmm. And Winooski then doubled down on it, saying...
So again, I completely understand everything you're saying. I feel like we're circle jerking right now, but like, and I think like we said everything we had to say, but like,
I don't know. Do you think this was productive? Do you think this was productive to help understand more?
Absolutely. By all means, I understand a bit more compared to before about virtue ethics.
And if you want, I could send you a really good article on virtue ethics from Plato.stanford.edu.
You can. I do not have any idea when I will be able to read it, since I'm filled with a brain with stuff to do.
Yeah. Now,
please do. But like the last thing I wanted to say on this personally is that. Like, I don't know if you remember, but like, I had a discussion with this with Celine and such, and eventually I came to the conclusion, like, I understand why people would do this. I just think a better behavior should be done, because at the end of the day, I totally understand why people would act upon their emotions and not instead on a constant display of maximum rationale. I completely understand. It's human. We are humans, and I totally understand that. But
even as a virtue ethicist, I agree with that, because that's one of the whole things about Plato and Aristotle when they first came up with and first started talking about virtue ethics. Is it was the idea is that we are meant as a society. I can't remember the exact phrase. It's a Greek word, and that's why I can't remember it off the top of my head. But it was a phrase that basically meant transformation and evolving to gain those virtues. And so basically we would examine it and say that, like, okay, so we as humans are not actually meeting these virtues, therefore we are not morally good people yet. However, that doesn't necessarily make us morally bad when we start looking at it with our practical wisdom, and we want to strive to reach these virtues. So I agree with you there that better solutions should be done and should be found. That's the whole goal of virtue ethics, is to get better as a person and as a society.
Yes, but like, and then both so at the end of the day, then what I said from the very beginning is right, but even from a virtue ethicist point.
Yeah,
But
I agree.
it
Like I said, this was never supposed to be a debate. This was never supposed to
Mhm. No,
be
no, no, no.
you
Okay,
coming
okay,
on here
okay.
and me
No, no,
telling
no,
you
no,
how
no, no,
wrong
no.
you are.
Okay, so no, sorry. No, it was not more towards you. It was
Yeah.
more in general, towards the other people who disagreed with me. I was just making a random thought in my mind. Sorry, it was not aimed at you. My apologies. But yeah, it in general, those were the issues that I had with the usage of death invitations. I understand, as I said, I understand why they were used. I just think better behavior should always be maintained, simply because of the reasons I told you before. Because they are dehumanizing, and I know that some people have told me that death invitations are not necessarily dehumanizing, but I find that argument weak,
I
personally.
I think you'd have
Uh,
to stretch really hard. Like, so for some of them, I think you'd have to stretch really hard for, like, for example, the low tier god. I think you'd have to stretch really hard to call that dehumanizing. But I can see the argument. That's why, just kind of jokingly, I don't know if you noticed, but the thumbnail for this stream, I made my eyes the low tier god. I did that. It's. Uh, I think it, or same thing with, like, do you like Huey Lewis and the News? You know, it's much different doing those things than outright
no,
screaming
no,
at somebody
absolutely.
to kill themselves. You know, it's very different. And while I would absolutely agree that saying to just outright kill themselves would be very dehumanizing and very wrong, I don't think that sending these memes, sending the American Psycho, if you don't shut the fuck up right now, I'm going to kill you. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's I don't necessarily think that they're good. They're definitely not morally good, but I also don't think that they're so severe to be morally bad. I think they're
Yeah,
just
and
kind of
I
tasteless.
totally understand you. But I am a very practical person. It's very
That's why
rare
you
that
should
I
be based
already.
to become a virtue ethicist instead of
No,
that
but
cringy ass
hold up.
utilitarian
Like
crap.
it, it is already rare that I accepted to do debate about morals, because I genuinely do not engage in this, because I just do not.
Luca, I've always been good faith with you.
Absolutely, I'm not. I'm absolutely.
You
I'm not saying it is the reason why I
had nothing to
accepted, because
worry.
no, 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 no. The reason why I did not want to, I do not want to engage with these debates. It's because of the kind of topics, because of how personal and often c- charged with personal trauma and such these things are. But of course, by all means, I accepted to come to your stream because one, you've always been good faith with me, and two, you've been always been good faith with me. So, I never had any doubt about joining you. My main point again at the end of the day is that I will always focus more about what's mostly practical and what's best for having the best results about my political ideology. My political ideology right now is bringing about more leftist ideas. So my entire focus is doing all the best that can be done to achieve a result. And I don't want to sound bad, but my logic is heavily impregnated. No, not impregnated. That's a bad word. Like heavily filled with Machiavellian logic. We should strive, even through certain sacrifices, to reach the best results, because I know that will be the best for many people, especially in leftist results. Especially you before cited the COVID crisis that brought many people, including yourself, upon a difficult spot, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Like my logic is this: we should be given that this falls under my political opinion a bit, but given the best way to change society is by convincing as many people of what you're doing is on quote unquote based. Um, I strongly believe then, I have a belief, and as such, I think about what should be done to achieve a result in the best and efficient way possible.
Yeah, I
And
understand what you're
so,
saying.
this is why I made to you the argument about utilitarianism, because to me, sending death invitations that can only hamper or like damage the effort of converting bigots, or even normies that are weird and like transphobic or such, because at the end of the day, for terrible reasons, transphobia is almost a unquote normie value, and we need to strive to change that. And
Yep, and I understand
sending
what you're saying. I made the same arguments for why Vosh's ironic misogyny with J.K. Rowling was bad.
Yeah,
I made the same
exactly,
arguments.
exactly. And exactly because of the argument I just made, this is why I believe sending death invitations to people that you think are bigots or appear to be bigots can really, really, really have a lot of problems, I feel.
Yeah, and I don't think that anybody that's even slightly educated on politics or morality or philosophy in general would disagree with you that it's bad. I think that the people who are saying it's good are. I hate using this phrase because it's been tainted by the fucking globes, but I think they're LARPing and that they need to stop trying to get involved in these spaces and just making it more difficult for the people who are actually
Hmm.
educated on these topics to make
Absolutely,
change happen.
absolutely.
But I think this was productive. I think that you
Absolutely,
had
I agree.
the primary reason I wanted to do this was because, so like I mentioned earlier, I think you have a habit where you feel like you need to respond to every single tweet that is sent to you. And it's
I'm
not a bad
just,
thing, buddy. But it's
I'm
really
just
hard to get
going
all
to.
your context out with
Oh
only
yeah,
240 characters.
look, I'm just going to make a very important quote, but I think many people will agree with me on this. I think that typing or written Luca envies what spoken Luca can be.
Yeah. So
Be-
the
because
primary reason I
because
wanted is so that you could get all your stuff out, and then I could also try and help you understand a little bit more about the moral frameworks that some people are utilizing here. Because I had a hunch, and my hunch was correct that you didn't know about virtue ethics enough there to know
No,
why people are doing this stuff.
I told you I'm a practical person. I do not interest myself in these
That's why
issues.
you
I'm
need to
mostly.
do virtue ethics. It's all about practicality. Practical wisdom is literally a part of virtue ethics. Come
Yes,
on, Luca.
yes, but utilitarianism is better.
No,
Okay,
it's
sorry.
not. Utilitarianism
I,
sucks. God, I could literally sit here and talk for the next 3 hours about how bad utilitarianism is, but we're not going to do that because you've got stuff going on here soon. That's why you needed to move the time up. And
oh well, yeah. As I told you, just stuff coming up. I'm sorry.
yep, no, it's all good.
I
We've
really
been
apologize.
going for almost an hour or almost 2 hours now anyway. So
Yeah.
we got everything covered that I think we wanted to talk about. I think you got a lot of information out that you wanted to get out. A lot of clarifications were made, and I think
Let's rephrase again for everyone, because I know this will be fucking clipped.
well, we're not on
Ableism
Twitch, so it's
bad.
gonna be hard.
Ableism bad. Racism bad. Death threats bad. Have a good fucking day. What the fuck am I supposed to say now?
Oh my god, that's hilarious. All right.
Yeah, I just honestly, aside from whether it was productive or not, I just hope that like you enjoyed having this talk.
Yeah, it was good. It was enjoyable.
I,
I
I, I virtually jerk myself off these talks and such. Like I like discussing with people and talking because it is for me a chance to learn. And as this the debate just proved to me once again, I learned something more today, and I'm glad for that. I appreciate and thank you for your patience,
yeah,
and thank you for having me
absolutely.
here.
And I think we need to have another time where we talk and maybe go into a different subject that you kind of mentioned. I think it's really cringe that you're a market socialist.
By all means, I
You
will be
could-
gladly. Not today, but like at a
no,
later
not
date.
today. Another date
I-
sometime.
if you're interested about what my critiques to Marxism, anarchism, and communism are, I will gladly present them to you, and we'll have a good discussion. But
we'll see.
that will be for another time.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I've got other people that I still need to talk to first. Ashley wants me to come on her stream sometime soon to talk about Marxism. And
look, don't worry, take your fucking time, because anyways I have to prepare for my thesis of my for my last semester, so I'm very busy myself.
I understand. Yeah. Also, I've emailed Vosh telling him he's a dummy that should talk to me about Marxism, but we'll see if that ever happens. All right.
Okay.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Luca. Follow Luca on Twitter. I know he's a filthy liberal, but at the end of the day, let me just say this publicly as well. So a lot of people refer to Luca as some very shitty things. People call him a fascist. They also engage in a lot of xenophobia just because he's Italian. This is all really fucked up. First of all, fascism is a very specific right-wing ideology that is ultra-nationalist and conservative. Luca is very far from that. Luca is very left-leaning. He's a liberal, so he's not quite left-leaning enough, but we'll work on it. Secondly, most of the times that people use for most of the stuff people use for this as their evidence is very out of context. I have personally talked with Luca a lot on a lot of his stuff, and most of his stuff is very out of context, or he's just a moron that doesn't know how to type properly and gets himself in trouble with his wording that he later goes on to clarify.
As I said, spoken Luca is eons above written Luca, and I will stand by those words, because I'm extremely limited by 280 characters.
The very few times that he has said something that was not out of context, that was bad, I've almost always seen him immediately go apologize and retract it when he's been educated and reinformed. So go follow Luca on Twitter. He's one of the few people I actually respect intellectually on that hell site. So,
well, with all of that being said, thank you, Emily, so much for having me here. Much appreciated, and I hope we can have in the near future, or at least when you have some time, more productive discussions like this.
Yeah, hopefully. We'll see.
Okay, well, I'll go then. Thank you very much for everything. Take care of yourself. Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.
See ya. Okay. Now, for those of you out there still in the chat, I'm going to be ending off the stream here. What did you guys think? Did you have fun? Was it an interesting conversation? Was it good? Going to give you guys a couple minutes to respond. Is there any questions or thoughts that people wanted to throw in before we end the stream off? No? Alrighty then. I guess we're going to go ahead and call it quits there. Thank you guys so much for watching. I don't know when I'll be live again. Follow me on Twitter and also join my Discord to stay notified on when we go live. Next time we stream, we're probably going to be doing some more Dark Souls, so that'll be a lot of fun. Until next time, though, I have been Yonadashi, and I'll see you guys all a little bit later.
Yeah. Unknown Brain. Marvin Devine. I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating things to all the room. Yeah.